fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren. Heard on KCOO 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
You are back in the House of Mystery, and of course I'm Al Warren, Mr. John Copenhaver.
Hey Al, how are you?
We've got the author of Anywhere You Run, a novel, and that's by Wanda M. Morris. Well, thank you for being here, Wanda.
Thank you for having me, Al and John.
Well, so Wanda, where did it all start for you?
Ay. Wow. Shall I go back as far as those Sears Charm School lessons or what? I
want to know about that.
Yeah, see, now we're getting to some real good information. No, I mean, I always try to picture how a writer begins their writing life, like where it comes from for them. And, you know, is it some sort of an event or some sort of thing that makes you start writing and you took off from there, something you did ever since you could remember? Or is this a recent kind of flash that happened?
Well, for me, gosh, I have always wanted to write, but I tamped down those desires. I made up all sorts of excuses. I was raising 3 kids. I, had quote unquote a real job. I was working too many hours to write. I never had time, whatever. And then way back in the Wayback Machine in 2008, I finally put pen to paper. Someone asked me recently, like, what was it that actually made you write the first scene? And I started All Her Little Secrets in 2008 because I had gone to a meeting and that meeting didn't go well. I felt disrespected and devalued in the meeting. I work in corporate America. And that is what made me put pen to paper. And I wound up writing a novel about a Black female lawyer who worked in a corporate environment where she felt devalued. And so that was kind of the genesis of it all.
Well, and it's interesting how you say that you'd always wanted to, but you always kind of had the excuse not to write. You know, you're putting things in front of writing all the way around, and then you started this book, all her little secrets. But that's still pretty courageous. Like that always takes a lot of nerve to actually. You know, in your mind for years, you kind of want to, but you don't, and you just, and you're not going to jump on stage, and all of a sudden you do. Even though that meeting you talk about didn't go good, what actually gave you the courage to actually write out in a book and want it published so people could see it?
Well, for me, writing was cathartic, I think, at that point, because I had so much frustration about what I was doing at the time in terms of, working in this corporate environment. I was so frustrated that writing out, these thoughts and these ideas was really a way to alleviate that frustration. Now, of course, the book evolved, thankfully so. From the very first draft, but nonetheless, it was kind of what got me through that period of time where I was feeling frustrated. So yeah, that's that. If you're looking for what was the motivation, that was the motivation. It was a way to release that frustration.
So in a way, it was I guess it was in essence a new way to get your feelings out rather than being locked into your mind or into your body. And it give you another outlet rather than just going around killing people that you didn't like.
Yeah, I don't think I harbored many thoughts about killing people, but I will say that in my books, I do that thing that a lot of writers do where they say, what if? And in my first book, I did ask a lot of times that question, like, what if you worked for someone and this thing happened? Or what if you walked into the office one day and that thing happened? So, yeah, I mean, I actually, you can ask my friend John, I'm actually a really nice person. I write about very dark things. But I think that's a lot of mystery and crime fiction authors that, we actually are, seeking to write those things that, are far and above what we would normally do. We're actually quite nice people, I think crime fiction writers are.
Yeah, we get all our frustrations out in our fiction.
Yep.
I do have a question though. Like, how did you find? So, you've had the situation that you were clearly and justifiably upset about, but you kind of turned it into a thriller. Like, did it just feel like a natural place to go, the genre, or I mean, of course, you could have written it as literary fiction or a variety of other things. I'm just curious how you ended up with thriller.
Well, I think that was primarily because I've always gravitated to mystery and thriller writing. I've always loved this genre, and so I think once I kind of had these thoughts about what the story might be about, I kind of leaned into the genre that I love. Now, I read all different types of books, but I really love mysteries and thrillers because I like that whole idea of, following along and trying to solve a puzzle along with the protagonist. So I think I just kind of leaned into what I, was familiar with and what I loved.
So when you released that first book, it looked like you were pretty successful with it. Editors pick, and you've got lots of sales. People are happy. All this hubbub and stuff, and now you can date anyone you want, and you've got everybody chasing you and stuff.
Well, that would be so, but I think my husband would have a problem with that.
Well, what come on, he's not here. Come on. No, but what was your reaction to that? In the sense of, were you satisfied with what you got out of that book?
Oh my gosh. That's like asking me, you woke up this morning and you were healthy and breathing. Were you satisfied with that? It's like, oh my gosh, it was above and beyond. I mean, when I sat down to write All Her Little Secrets, you know how it kind of came out of this frustration. And then once I started writing these characters that I came to love, I was just so focused on getting the story between the covers of a book that I had not even thought far enough ahead, like, oh gosh, could this, actually make a list, or, could it sell well? I was just, so happy that, I had a story that I loved. And then, the book got so much rejection from agents that my next milestone was, oh, could I just get an agent? Because, I'd written the book, put the book away for 7 years, and then went back to it, finished writing it, and then spent another 4 years trying to get an agent. So once I hit that milestone, then it was oh gosh, could I actually get a book contract? So, I was far and above blown away by, how well that book was received. And I'm grateful. I am grateful for every minute because I know that doesn't always happen. There are lots and lots and lots of really, really good writers who don't see the kind of commercial success that books can get, and that doesn't mean that book is lesser than. It just means for whatever reason it didn't happen. So I am grateful for every success and every milestone that I get.
Do you think it changed you in the way you write after you went through all that and after you go through your first book and put it together? At the end of it, now when you're on to your second book, are you a different writer?
I think I am, only because when I was writing my first book, that was the very first book I'd ever written, like ever. I don't have any, drawer books that won't see the light of day. All the Little Secrets was the very first book I ever attempted to write. And so I think that I was learning how to write a book when I was writing that book. And, all that rejection I got, a lot of it was warranted because the book wasn't ready at some points. And I got the gift from some agents who were kind enough to tell me, here's what doesn't work in this book. Here's, if you were to revise this, here's what I think you need to do. And I took that and poured it back into the book. So all of that time I was learning how to write a book. I had to learn about characterization and pacing and dialogue. So by the time I went to my second book, I think I had a bit of a leg up on those things, but I still had that same kind of awkward fear that I think a lot of writers have when they go into any new project. Is this idea big enough to sustain, 300 or 400 pages? Will people want to read this? Is this interesting enough that people will want to plunk down $20 and spend 8 or 12 hours reading it? So, yes and no. I think I did have a bit of a leg up, but, it was still kind of scary to, start that new project and hope for the best.
Yeah, follow-up's always tough. So anywhere you run, let's talk about the basic premise of that. What's the storyline?
So the story is about two sisters, Violet and Marigold, who have some dark secrets, their own individual dark secrets, and they take off running to different parts of the country after Violet kills a man who attacks her. What the two sisters don't realize is that there's a man who has some dark secrets of his own, who is hot on their trail because he has a very unique motive for finding the women. And the book is historically set, which is very different from my first book. Anywhere You Run is set in 1964. And it takes place during the summer of the Freedom Rider murders, where Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner were murdered in Mississippi for trying to help Black Mississippians get the right to vote.
Putting it in that kind of a setting, is there a particular reason you chose that setting of 1964 and with that going on in America?
Yeah, so I started this second book right after the country had gone through the 2020 election. And so there was all this noise about election fraud and, the big lie. And I thought it might be really cool to write a book about something having to do with that, but I couldn't really figure out a contemporary angle for a story that dealt with that. As I started to research voting rights for Blacks in this country, I came to realize I think that there is a much deeper and more layered story if I were to set it during the summer of 1964, where people were fighting mightily hard to get voting rights for Blacks in this country. And I'd had this character roaming around in my head. And I thought, oh, it might be a cool idea to explore some parallels between what was happening in 1964 and sadly what feels eerily familiar to 2022. And so the book includes themes around equity and voting rights for Blacks, police brutality, brutality against gay and lesbian people, abortion rights, and a woman's right to govern her own body. Things that we were dealing with in 1964 that sadly we're still dealing with now in 2022.
Was it hard to shift into a historical sort of mindset? I mean, I know you said you did some research, but was that, a difficult choice to make? And were you ever frustrated with it? I know since I write historical, I often am, and cursing myself. Why did I choose to, why did I choose to just set things in historical time period? So I'm just curious. Maybe that wasn't the case for you, but
you know what? I did have those moments while I was writing the book, thinking to myself, Wanda, what the heck? There was an easier way to write a book. But once I had made the decision about the theme and the plot of what I was going to write about, it had to be set in that period. So to your point, I did tons and tons of research about the period. But one of the things that I did that I think really helped me is I immersed myself in that time period. So if I was in the car or I was at home cleaning or whatever, I was listening to music from 1964, and I was always reading magazines from 1964 so that I could kind of get the ear of what people were talking about then and how they were talking and the vernacular. And so I tried to do things where I was kind of constantly in that time period so that when I sat down to actually write, I was in the mindset of 1964. The hardest part for me writing that project was the historical research around people who had fought hard and some bled and died so that Blacks could have the right to vote in this country. And so there were, pictures and firsthand accounts that, I saw and I read, and those were the more difficult things for me to do as part of this project.
Did you take any real people from that time period and use them in the book?
Oh, I didn't use them in the book, but I talked to people who had lived during that time period, older relatives of mine. In fact, I talked to a lawyer by the name of Jonathan Shapiro, who was a lawyer for the Mississippi Summer Project, which is the initiative to help Blacks secure the right to vote in Mississippi. And he was a lawyer during that time. He also happens to be the husband of Hank Philippi Ryan, and she was wonderful enough to make the introduction. And he was a ton of help because, he gave me insight into that time period and what it was like, actually to be there and try and fight this good fight. I did not use actual people with the exception of the references to Cheney, Goodman, and Schwerner, which I made at the very opening of the book. All the other characters are, they come out of my wild and dark imagination.
Do you find it hard to, imagine? I know I do this as well, but it's very hard for me to imagine writing a character that is actually a historical character. I'm the same in the sense, all my characters are invented, and then there's sort of historical figures, get mentioned and discussed, but they don't really enter the stage. But there are, of course, other writers that just take on, they're like, oh, I'm going to do a fictionalized version of Lincoln or something like that. And I'm just curious, was it just because your story didn't lead you that way, or was that sort of a conscious decision to not?
Yeah, I think it just was the type of story I was writing and the way in which I wanted to cover the themes, that I didn't want to use a real person, because then I would have to fictionalize, their story to some extent. And, I didn't want to disturb that, particularly because it was historical. So I don't want to do that. And then I just found it very liberating to come up with these characters, because then I could create what they do and how they sound, and why they have the motivations to do the things that they do, as opposed to being stuck within the confines of an actual character from history.
Your characters, then, you say they come out of the dark parts of your mind. So your characters, explain that process. Like, where do they come from? And when you decide on a character, like say the two sisters, their main characters, how do they develop, and what kind of relationship do you have with them?
It's interesting. This story is about three sisters, actually. One of the sisters, and it's not a spoiler, but one of the sisters is deceased. But she comes into the book as a character through a series of diary entries. Each of those sisters, I think, has a little bit of me. And I think that's kind of the case with all my characters. And by that, I mean, in the way that they might approach an issue or some event that might have taken place. For example, the sister Marigold in the book she's very bookish. Didn't like to go outside and play a lot as a kid. I was that kid. You know what I mean? So when I am developing characters, I tend to spend more time thinking rather than writing. So for this project, once I decided on what I wanted to write about, I probably just spent like a month thinking about, who Marigold would be, and, what Violet would be like, before I even put pen to paper. Because I kind of have to know, what they sound like in my head. Now, my characters, and if you read my books, I don't really describe them as having, brown eyes and, pointy ears or things like that, but they develop more as a vibe to me. I think I heard, maybe it was Megan Collins, I think, and she said, yeah, my characters come to me as a vibe. And I was like, that's right. That's exactly what they do. And so I try to make sure that I know who they are, what they like, what they don't like, how would they interact in certain situations. And then I try to build supporting characters around the main character. And then those supporting characters actually help to build the description of what that character is. And so, for example, Violet is strikingly beautiful in the book, but I don't describe how that beauty looks, but I let other people who interact with her describe how she makes them feel when they look at her. There's a white man in the book who says, I don't even find Black women attractive, but I look at her and that Cupid bow in her mouth, and I'm kind of like, wow, she's different. And so I do things like that help me to build the characters. I don't know if that makes any sense. I now feel like I'm kind of, talking in circles, but it really does kind of evolve to me as I'm, starting to write a project.
I like that you say 5. I think I'm going to steal that because I think that's really true.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah, give Megan Collins the
I'll give
credit for
Megan
that. I
Collins
heard
that.
her say that, and I was like, "That's exactly right. That hits the nail on the head."
Yeah, I teach creative writing a lot, and I'm always trying to get students to understand that a character is more than their description or
Mm-hmm.
and you're right. And I love that you're sort of talking about the fact that it's not just about how they objectively look, but it's how they're perceived by people around them, which is part of their character.
Right.
I mean, I thought it was cool. Like, I'm the, the kind of like, I'm always interested in craft. So I'm always going to latch on to that.
Do you hear your characters in your head?
I've been asked that before, and actually, it's weird. I don't hear I kind of do and kind of don't. By that, I mean, I hear characters talking to each other. And so, I hear snippets of conversation between the characters. They never talk to me. I hear some writers say, "Oh yeah, I started writing and then the character just took off and told me what I needed to write." And I don't get that. I just will sit down with a scene and I listen for the dialogue. Usually when I start a project, I usually start off with dialogue because that's what's going on in my head. Is, 2 or 3 people in a scene talking, and, each one comes into the scene and wants something different. And those are the kinds of things that I hear, but not necessarily a voice. I usually have to layer that on later in the revision process, whether somebody had, a keen or high pitched voice or someone had a baritone, that kind of stuff comes in later. But I just kind of sit there initially to capture the dialogue and what these characters are doing to and with one another.
That's good. It makes you sound a little bit more sane. I get a lot of these writers that say they hear voices and they're driving around and they're talking to them and all this sort of stuff. I just, you're not driving down the road talking to some voice. So
no. That does not happen.
Yeah, I don't really understand that either.
No, that's good. That's good. We can unlock the door now. So when you have this, and I'm just picturing this, so you've got the setting, the area, the events going on as it is. Then you've got the sisters and their scenario going on and all of this working together. Is there a subtext or a meaning underneath this story? Is there something that you're wanting your readers to take away from the story?
Oh, absolutely. I want them to take away from the story that for as much talk as people give to all the progress that this country has made, it's been little to none. Sure, Black people don't have to sit in the back of a bus anymore or enter into the back of a restaurant, but there are still huge inequities between Blacks and whites. There are still large gaps in terms of wages between men and women, whether women can, govern their own bodies. Sadly, when I turned this book into my publisher, Roe v. Wade was still in effect. And now it is not. And so my daughter, who is in her 20s, now has less rights as a woman than I had when I was in my 20s. That is sadly not how the world is supposed to work. Each generation is supposed to be better than the previous. And so I want people to see that we are still grappling with issues around, brutality against, the LGBTQ community, which is also a theme in the book. These are things that we are still dealing with today. And I wrote a book that takes place over 60 years ago. Like, what are we doing? And can't we be better than this.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you think a lot of the problem is that it, um, even when a law is made and placed and agreed upon and it's passed, that it takes generations to really absorb that law?
Perhaps if I knew the solution, Al, I'd probably hightail it somewhere to the nearest senator or, government official to say, here's how we can fix it. And I don't know that because, people are still people and they have free will. And you think that things that, for example, you gave a perfect example that I demonstrate in the book. The book takes place or a portion of the book takes place in Mississippi. And I actually wanted Mississippi to stand out as a character in the book because it was one of those states that was the staunchest in trying to maintain segregation and Jim Crow laws. And so even after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which opened public facilities to people regardless of race and color, Mississippi business leaders had determined that they were going to still maintain segregation. And so they refused to abide by the law. So the Civil Rights Act was passed in July 1964, and there is this small wedge of time during that summer after the passage where Mississippians still would not follow the law. And so that's why it became necessary for organizations like SCLC and NAACP to send in testers that would go in and try and check into hotels or enter movie theaters, sit at lunch counters in order to make sure that people were abiding by the law. And Mississippians were not doing that. They said that they were going down in flames. And some Mississippi business leaders would shutter their businesses rather than serve Blacks. So again, I wish I could tell you what the solution is to that. But here we sit now in 2022 where we have political leaders in this country who decide that they won't follow the law, that the truth is not the truth, and a lie is not a lie. Sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say that, what's going on in America is definitely a little bit off the normal issue of what and how to deal with problems.
Al, it's bonkers out there.
Yeah.
It's bonkers. Let's just be honest.
Well, I'm trying to be polite here, but there's.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah. No. I mean, it is. It's kind of nutty. But the thing is, you have to wonder why. There's more than just than what we see on the surface here. There's something else going on.
There's something else definitely at play. Were I to say it, I think that, race still continues to be a really big issue in this country. And that people will sometimes work against their own self-interest in order to feel they are superior or they are better than. And that's unfortunate. I try and point out in the book that a lot of this still comes back down to voting, that who you go to the polls to elect to govern you, to govern this country, is still impacting us. Right now, we have a Supreme Court majority that was created by a man who was elected president. And it happened because there were all sorts of voter suppression shenanigans going on. There was this kind of, combustible, convergence of, people and racial polarization. And all of this has created this kind of, like I said, this kind of bonkers world that we live in now. And I don't think that it's going to be easily rectified. I like to think that, the runoff election between Herschel Walker and Reverend Warnock is maybe the righting of the ship, because it would be insane at this point to start electing officials that have no moral character or intellectual capacity to handle governing this country.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. You're right. And but even as it stands, having a Supreme Court with people don't leave until they die or retire, it's that's a long time to go. And you see the problem you get from what I study is when there's a way of life that runs for years, laws, let's say now, okay, Roe v. Wade's gone, and let's say abortions are illegal. And from now until the time that it does change back, which could be years and years, and that whole time period, you've got generations and you've got people that come up and they learn this as what is real. And, they learn the law as it's to be right to them. So they think this is right. So then when you try to change the law, then they're upset. I think to explain it easier was like even when the gay rights movements in the 60s until the riots, until it became legal, the 20 years before that, the police were going around raiding and assaulting and robbing gay men just at will for the fun of it. And they considered them to be criminals and bad people and evil and all sorts of stuff, some mentally ill. And just because they changed the law in 1967, those people that had been treating gay people that way for the previous 20 years didn't change. So I think that's the problem with the time thing. You get stuck with this Supreme Court. It places a lot of standards in society that you have to live with.
I think some of that is true to an extent, but when you look at racial discrimination in this country, well, we said in 1964 that it was illegal to discriminate against people in terms of, public access or employment or any of these other things. That didn't stop it. It still continues to this day. And we're talking almost 60 years. So, I hear what you're saying. I just wish I knew the answer. I'm not quite sure what the answer is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I've noticed teaching young people, I teach undergraduates, and thankfully they're very politically activated these days. But I don't think my generation, I don't think millennials were particularly politically activated. And it feels like, the problem is that to rectify some of these, racism that has been in place, or homophobia, misogyny, et cetera, that's been in place for so many years, centuries, is that we're going to have to sustain that activism across generations. And so if you start thinking everything's okay, or like we're got Obama as president, that's everything's solved, racism's solved, and of course we know that's not true, but outward illusion, the sort of cultural kind of connection to it. So I really hope that we can continue to have young people engaged, and there's not another lull. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's like it has to be sustained.
Exactly. I think that's one of the reasons why, Roe v. Wade was overturned, because I think to a certain extent, people became complacent and they were like, yeah, this has always been law and it won't change. And all it took was one term by a president to wipe all of that away through Supreme Court appointments. And so, we got complacent and thought, yeah, this will never change. This is law. And to your point, I agree, John, that, we just have to stay in the game.
Now, this book is done, and when you do books like this, do you ever plan sequels? Do you ever plan to take some of your characters and have them come back again in a different book?
I don't initially start out that way. There is a bit of an Easter egg in Anywhere You Run from All Her Little Secrets, and I'll just let readers go out and discover that for themselves in regards to characters. But I don't, like, way back when I, had finally finished All Her Little Secrets. I love those characters so much. And, I had my protagonist, I thought, oh yeah, I could do, another 2 books just with her and, what happens after this. But, things evolve and things change. And like I said, by the time I finished that book, I looked up and the world was just going crazy. And I thought, oh, I have to write about this because, again, I'm frustrated. And I write when I'm frustrated. So that's why I got a different project, and came to write Anywhere You Run. So I don't have any plans to write a sequel to Anywhere You Run. I'm working on a 3rd book that's, again, I've gone back to contemporary, totally different characters. So it just kind of depends on my mood.
Yeah, it's kind of how much of yourself is in this character, any of these characters, and who would you say you're the most of in a character?
Gosh, like I alluded to earlier, the 3 sisters in Anywhere You Run, I think there's a little bit of each of them in me. Marigold was very bookish, and I was very bookish and one of those kind of studious students. The oldest sister, Rose, who is deceased, but dreams of being a writer, there's a little bit of that in me. And then Violet, who is the youngest sister, she's feisty and, and she's the youngest out of the family, and I'm the youngest of 7 kids. And so I think I put a little bit of myself in each of the characters and the protagonists that I write about, just because sometimes there are experiences in my life that I like to exploit through the narrative of my book. And so putting a little piece of me in it, but certainly by no means are these books, autobiographical or anything like that. When I wrote All Her Little Secrets, I used to get asked all the time, so, who did you work with that was like Jonathan in the book? It's like, no, like, did you ever walk in on a dead body? No. Did you ever walk away and leave a dead body without calling the authorities? No. So
tell the truth. How hard is it to get into the minds of the evil, the bad character, the do bad person, the killer, or the just awful person that you get into, or someone that when you're talking about racism, someone that's that just doesn't like black people or gays or whatever it is. They've just got this hate. How do you get into that mind and write it and make it come alive? And then how does that affect you?
Well, certainly with the second book, because it was set in 1964 and people felt a lot freer saying and doing really, really, really horrible things. That was tough. And so sometimes after I wrote a particularly difficult scene, I would kind of let it rest and, go off and watch Cartoon Network or something, just to kind of give my mind a little breather. But I actually enjoy writing the darker characters, because it gives me an opportunity to explore the human psyche, and what is it that motivates people to do such awful things that would amass trauma and pain on other people. It gives me the opportunity to explore, human dynamics that would, wind up causing somebody so much pain. So from a craft standpoint, I enjoy writing those characters and exploring the motivations for them doing the things that they do. But like I said, with Anywhere You Run, because, trigger warning for, your listeners, there's terminology in there that is very Jim Crow South, 1964. And so sometimes after writing some of those scenes with some of that terminology and some of the, bad things that they do, I'd have to step back for a minute.
I would say that would be tough to work with in a book and getting into that emotion, thank God I just write children's books.
People tell me, oh my gosh, the ending of your book. And I'm like, yeah, I know one of these days I'm going to write like this really happy rom-com or something. Right now, I'm not there. I keep, writing these books that explore a really dark side. But I think that, again, that's because I try to write about issues that are important to me or issues that move me. And interestingly enough, they're issues that move other people. They're issues that are important to other people too.
Well, and dealing with such emotion and such important issues, when you sit down to write, what's Wanda's process? Like, does Wanda have to be alone in a room, no noise, everyone's away from home, and can you set the times, 10 to 2 today, 10 to 3 tomorrow, and sit down and then turn it on and write? Or do you have to put yourself or be in a certain mood or emotions going on in order for you to get this kind of work done?
Well, for me, writing is, I don't want to describe it as a job because I love this more than any job I've ever had, but writing is a business. And so I come to this business every day prepared to do business. So that means that I have to be in a chair and ready to work. I don't sit and wait for the muse to hit me. I have to, and I'm a bit of a dinosaur and a creature of habit. I write in silence. If I'm writing new material, I have to be in silence. I can't listen to music. I can't write in, coffee shops. I write all of my new material longhand, yellow legal pad, blue gel, pilot gel ink pens. It's like ritual. Once I get a substantial amount of the book done in longhand, then I transfer that into the computer. And that's where I can listen to, light classical or light jazz. Nothing that's too toe tapping because then I'll start dancing and singing along. And then I put that into the computer and print that out. And that gives me my first draft. And then I do all my revisions by longhand. Red gel ink pen this time. And yeah, I know it's a creature of habit. But that's kind of how I do it. So now I'm working on my third book. And so I am in the process of writing new material, which means with a yellow notepad and a blue gel ink pen writing every day, longhand at the desk in silence.
Well, what happens to Wanda then when things are going wrong? And I don't mean necessarily in the writing world, but your neighbors are outside protesting, wearing masks, and you've got Herschel Walker asking you to vote for him, and you got all this let's say all the stress that goes on. It's been pretty tense in a lot of times. in the last few years. So when all this is happening, do you still go on? You can do it. It doesn't stop you?
No, dogs barking outside. My neighbors have 2 dogs, and they're like white noise to me now because they bark all the time. Um, but no, I mean,
Republicans are like white noise.
right. Herschel Walker was like white noise, right?
Oh.
No, I go into my study. I write from, a room in my home, and I go in there and I close the door, and it's pretty quiet in there, and I'm able to kind of shut things out. Like I said, as long as, there isn't music or someone's talking to me or someone's talking behind me and I'm trying to eavesdrop on a conversation, then I can pretty much focus and block that out. Now, I had a pretty heavy promo schedule for the second book. And so then I found myself having to, kind of write whenever I could find the time. And so those get to be kind of gnarly. And so if I, didn't get an opportunity to write during the day, then I was trying to do it at night. But my brain is most equipped to write early in the mornings, because I'm just kind of fried by dinner time. But yeah, I just tend to focus.
So you don't really hold on to it. So, you hear a news story, old Putin falls down.
I don't have the TV on, so I won't have a TV on. No.
No, but before you go into the writing, like the night before, Putin falls down the stairs and poops himself, and then the next morning you're up early writing, and you're not holding on to that. Like, you don't hold on to any of it then.
No, not unless one of my loved ones is in the news. I'm going to let Putin, handle his business. And I just go about the business of writing.
Well, I was trying to throw you there, but hey. So now, are you really interacting with readers and fans and people like that? Or do you do social media? Do you do website? What's your way of connecting with your readers?
So people should feel free to send me a note if you like my books through my website. There's a contact page. It's wandamorriswrites.com. But I'm on all the social media platforms, Twitter. I'm Wanda Mo 14. Instagram, I'm Wanda Mo Writes, and Facebook, I'm Wanda Morris Writer. I've gotten on Hive, but I just have been too busy to get on there and do anything of any substance. But I do like to interact with readers and booksellers and librarians. And so I always encourage people to reach out to me. Now, I've got notes that, some aren't so nice, and I just let that energy go. But I love interacting with readers. So yeah, reach out.
Oh, you don't just like hunt them down and get them killed? Or?
No.
Oh, boy. There's so much fun in that. Jesus, I'm busy all the time. Well, of course, we'll put your information up and your books on the website. People can find you with one click. Got to help her out. Wanda needs buy books.
That's right.
Buy books.
Buy books.
Yeah. Buy books. Buy a book, make someone happy. She needs Christmas money. Okay. So the latest book, Anywhere You Run, a novel, and Wanda M. Morris is the writer and has been our guest. So, we appreciate you being by here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Al and John. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or show, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.